Today we're going to be talking about human origins and human evolution. So first we need to go back to Charles Darwin. In addition to writing on the origin of species, he also published this book called Descent of Man in the year 1871. So at this point, Origin of Species had already been released, and the basic ideas of evolution had really taken hold and gained popularity in scientific communities. And so people were at that time a little bit more ready to digest the ideas put forward by Darwin in this book, but still not 100% on board. There was a lot discussed in Descent of Man, including something called evolutionary psychology, and it also touched on differences between human races and between human species. So as I've mentioned in a previous lecture, a lot of these ideas surrounding evolutionary theory tended to be backed up by examples that were rooted in sexism and misogyny and racism. So even though a lot of the content and the scientific pillars of this book were sound, when placed into a framework of misogyny, sexism, and racism, that is not what we want to do. So of course we can do better, and we have learned much of evolutionary psychology, for example, is rooted in sexism. And so even though it was gaining in popularity at that time, we now recognize that much of the arguments for things that we see in difference between sexes, for example, was rooted in this fundamental sexism that pervaded the culture at the time. But of course, we can do better. So now let's look back at the taxonomy of Homo sapiens. We all know our species name is Homo sapiens, but what does that mean, basically? So last lecture, we discussed that humans are included in the primates. So you and me, we're mammals. We're also primates. We can break that down from the order primates into the family called hominids. Hominids means primates with relatively flat faces and three-dimensional stereoscopic vision. Our genus is Homo, right? So Homo sapiens, Homo is that genus name, and the genus Homo contains hominids with upright posture and large brains for their body size. And then finally getting to our species name of Homo sapiens, this is the member of the genus Homo with a high forehead and thin skull bones. So it might surprise you to learn that there are other members of the genus Homo. It's just that Homo sapiens are the only surviving members of that genus. We have Homo heidelbergensis, we have Homo erectus, and we have Homo neanderthalensis, or the Neanderthals. But in addition to that, we have Homo sapiens here. And we will discuss the different representatives of the hominids in the coming slides. But for right now, let's take a step back and take a look at the mammalian classification tree. Okay, so way back here, we have the ancestral mammals that then split off into the monotremes. So remember our platypus, that split off into the eutherians and the marsupials. We are a eutherian. We have a placenta. We also have feet, ankles, jaws, and teeth. And then finally, we can trace our way down to primates over here. So our closest living relatives, for the sake of this classification tree, are tree shrews, rabbits, and rodents, and we are sister taxa to shrews, bats, cetaceans, so dolphins, and the carnivores. So let's zoom in on this part of the tree here, the primate part of the tree. This is the order primates. So if we look back to about 65 million years ago, we can trace our ancestral lineage through time along this y-axis here. As we mentioned in the last lecture of mammals, we have major groupings of our primates. We have the prosimians here, the tarsiers, the lorises, and the lemurs. We then also have what are monkeys, true monkeys. True monkeys are represented by the Old World monkeys and the New World monkeys. Old World monkeys are inhabiting areas of Asia and Africa, while New World monkeys inhabit the Americas, so North, Central, and South America. New and old over here. But then we can take a look at the last common ancestor of monkeys and apes, which lived around 25 million years ago. So humans, we are primates, however, we are not monkeys. The monkeys split over here, and we have monkeys on the left and apes on the right in this diagram. So the common ancestor to monkeys and apes lived about 25 million years ago. Then we also had another split between the lesser apes and the great apes. So all of these collectively, the lesser and the greater, they're in the superfamily Hominoidea, but then focusing specifically on the great apes, like the gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and the humans, that is the family Homidae. Now, when genetics hit the scene, we had to reclassify what we called things. And so this is the modern classification of the family Hominidae. Okay, so over here we do have a split to where the gibbons are on their own over here. Underneath the Hominoidea, we have the Hominidae. The Hominidae splits off to where we have the orangutan by itself. Underneath the Hominidae, we have the Homininae, where we get the gorilla by itself, and a sister taxon to the Hominini. The Hominini contains the genus Pan with the chimpanzees and the genus Homo with humans. Yes, it's very confusing and genetics just had to go and mess up our entire system, but we are better for it. So when we're talking about hominoids, just in general, the great apes and the humans, these are their features. The hominoids split from the monkeys about 20 to 25 million years ago, as was relayed on the previous slide. And what sets apart the hominoids from other groups is the larger brain size compared to body size when put in relation to other primate groups. The hominoids have more flexible behavior, so it's less on innate instinct or inborn instinct, and it's more in learned behaviors in a social setting where you take cues from others that are around you. They are mostly larger than monkeys in their body size, with the exception of the gibbon, and the hominoids have pretty long arms and short legs and no tail, so the hominoids are tailless. The gibbon and the orangutan are primarily arboreal, meaning they do have a lifestyle primarily in the treetops. And specifically, when we're talking about gorillas, chimps, and humans, they have that great proclivity to be social animals. So they display a whole lot of social behavior. They are primarily terrestrial, so they're not in the treetops as often. And specifically, the chimps are more closely related to humans than gorillas, as was relayed on the previous classification tree. Much of our understanding on the social behaviors of primates was made bare by these long-term studies performed by Dr. Jane Goodall that started in the 1960s. She made observations for lifetimes of primates, specifically in Gombe National Forest. She would understand how mothers rear their young and then watch that young grow up into adulthood to see how they raise their young. And she is now Dame Jane Goodall. She is now a dame, and without her, we would not know nearly as much about primate social behavior as we do today. Moving now to the hominins. This is all of the modern humans and the members of Homo and those early human ancestors. So here we have all species that are believed to be more closely related to humans than chimpanzees. So now we're focusing in on our closest relatives, all of which, as we discussed already, are extinct. So this is humans and our direct ancestors since the split from chimps, which is thought to have occurred about 6 to 8 million years ago with this specific fossil that we call Toomai or Toomey. We have three major groups within the hominins. We have the Australopithecines, the Paraanthropus, and the genus Homo. Chimps are not our ancestors, okay? What we need to make clear from here on out, take this with you if you take nothing else from this lecture, we are not descended from chimps. They are not our ancestors. We simply share a very recent common ancestor. Again, that split probably 6 to 8 million years ago. As you can see also from this chart, when we go back from 4 million years ago to today on the left, notice that it's not a simple line of descent. We don't have one ancestor that gives rise directly to Homo, that gives rise directly to Homo sapiens. Instead, we have several hominid species that coexisted at the same time, probably taking up the same ecospace and competing for resources. So for example, the Australopithecus bonsai, look at the great range of time that this organism was thought to inhabit the earth. It overlapped in time and perhaps space with Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, and other species of the hominids. We should also point out that gorillas, chimps, and hominids split about 6 to 8 million years ago, and at a generous 25-year generation time, that means that there were about 320,000 generations ago that we saw strong natural selection pushing toward the modern day Homo sapiens. So now let's go back and make sure that we understand what the difference between these terms are. They can be confusing, especially if you go through the literature and even textbooks that are not that old. They use these terms interchangeably, and they've really changed their meaning very recently. So hominid or hominoid, this refers to a group of all modern and extinct great apes. Okay, that includes modern humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, plus all of their immediate ancestors. So this defines the hominoids or the hominids. But then when we're focusing on the modern humans, an extinct human species that gave rise to humans, we are referring to hominins. Okay, again, modern humans, extinct human species, and all immediate ancestors. That includes everything from the genus Homo, Australopithecus, the Paranthropus, and the Ardipithecus. Those are all hominins. Okay, so therein lies the difference between the two. Let's take a look now at the genetic differences between hominids and hominins. So hominids have 46 chromosomes. That includes the Neanderthal. That includes the newly discovered group, the Denisovans, and also modern Homo sapiens. So we have 46 chromosomes, as did these other groups, which means that we probably could have exchanged genetic material early in our ancestry because we were genetically compatible in that way. But when we look at other extant hominoids, we see that our gorillas, our orangutans, and our chimpanzees, their diploid condition is having 48 chromosomes instead of 46. Therefore, we are not genetically compatible. We could not produce viable offspring because of the differing amounts of chromosomes in our genetic DNA. We can look at how much DNA we share with each other as modern humans, as well as how much we share with our hominin ancestors. 99.9% of our DNA as a single individual is shared with other individual modern humans. So that means that we have a whole heck of a lot shared between us genetically, which absolutely makes sense because we're all of the same species. It doesn't matter what your hair looks like, if you're tall, if you're skinny, if you have a lot of pigmentation in your skin, if you have blue or brown eyes, we share about 99% or 99.9% of our DNA. We can take a look at genetic evidence from existing Neanderthal bones that we're able to perform genetic analysis on, which I think is fascinating. And modern humans and Neanderthals share about 99.7% of our DNA. You can, with 23andMe now, do genetic testing to understand how much of your DNA is Neanderthal DNA, this, that, and the other. But by and large, if we just take a wide sample of modern humans, we do share quite a bit of our genetic material with Neanderthals. New genetic evidence from this newly discovered type of hominin, the Denisovan, shows that we share 99.6% of our DNA with the Denisovans. So again, a whole lot of shared DNA. means high potential for interbreeding and acquiring genes from other species that might be a benefit to your species. If you watch the YouTube video, When We Met Other Humans, they discuss this idea of adaptive introgression, and that is the acquisition of genes that do become beneficial later on in our lineage. We can take a look at how much we share as humans with other things that are absolutely not closely related to us, like bacteria, cats, and bananas. Interestingly enough, we share about 60% of our DNA with a banana. Next, let's talk about some of the early characteristics that separates the early hominins from their hominoid relatives. First, we have the occurrence of bipedalism, or walking upright. So even though humans are tetrapods, we have 4 limbs, we only use 2 limbs for walking. The other 2 we use as our arms. And those arms are extremely important for tool making, also for carrying young and caring for young. And even just standing upright helps you cool your body a lot easier, as well as see over tall grasses. So the evolution of bipedalism in the hominin line really helped to set the stage for future evolutionary success. In addition, the hominin jaw shape, it is smaller with specialized teeth for an omnivorous diet. And we had more of a pronounced chin early in our ancestry. We also, as we keep mentioning, had a larger brain size and an increased cerebellum that allowed complex thought and prediction to occur. We had a longer childhood and more learning happening early in the childhood of our early hominin ancestors. And that, of course, was brought about by this social innate behavior where relying upon social structure was extremely important for learning. We had reduced size difference between the sexes. So there still was sexual dimorphism in that you can tell just by physical appearance males from female individuals. However, the size difference started to disappear between the 2 different sexes. We had in our early hominins social behavior, the development of language to allow that social behavior to occur, and then passing along knowledge of tool creation and tool use, extremely important in early hominin evolution. We had extended parent care and a longer juvenile period, again, to develop that culture and the knowledge passed on from family to child. Our early hominin ancestors, they decreasingly relied on a strong sense of smell, and by contrast, bolstered their sense of eyesight and vision with their stereoscopic 3D vision and increased hand-eye coordination, again, that allowed the creation of tools and harvesting food. The eyes were larger and also directed more forward. And again, not all of these traits evolved at the same time along the different lineages. This is an example of what we call mosaic evolution, where some genes are rapidly selected for and therefore undergo more selective pressure to evolve, whereas other genes simply are not under as great of selection pressure and therefore evolve at a slower rate. And here we can compare directly the skeletal shape and architecture between an early hominin, the Australopithecine, and its close chimpanzee relative here on the left. The same bones are color-coded with the same color for the skeleton on the left and on the right. So for example, here we have the skull outlined in yellow, and specifically what it's talking about, skull attaches inferiorly on the hominin and skull attaches posteriorly on the chimpanzee. It's referencing specifically the foramen magnum. Okay, the foramen magnum is a large hole on the underside of the skull where the spinal cord exits and follows the spinal column. So the placement of the foramen magnum underneath the skull allows the eyes in the hominin to face forward when the body is upright. So in humans and in the Australopithecine imaged here, the foramen magnum is positioned centrally, as you can tell right here, which allows the human body or the hominin body to be oriented vertically for bipedal movement. But when we're taking a look at chimpanzees and other apes, that foramen magnum is positioned toward the back of the skull, as you can see here, which means that the spinal cord is actually exiting at sort of an angle here. So that is the differences in skull architecture. What we do have in terms of similarities in the skull, though, is this facial prognathism. Okay, that simply means that the bottom of the chin juts out pretty strongly, both in the chimp and the Australopithecine, but that facial prognathism decreases throughout evolutionary time in the hominin lineages to what we see today in modern humans, where our chin does not protrude nearly as much as it did in our early hominin ancestors. And just familiarize yourself with the other differences in skeletal architecture between the chimpanzee and the hominin here in terms of the spine, the arms, the pelvis, and the femur. So let's talk about some specific hominins and their fossils and what mode of life they would have displayed when they were alive. Here we have that Toomai fossil, the Sahelanthropus chadensis. This is the current oldest fossil at about 6 to 7 million years old. We have the fossil here, and what we can do is facial reconstructions with a little bit of artist license to understand that this is perhaps what it looked like when it was roaming the earth. We have reduced canine teeth in Toomai. We also have a flatter face, and it was predicted that Toomai was more upright and bipedal compared to other hominids. Next, we have Orion tugensis. This fossil dates back to 6.1 to 5.8 million years ago. And this specific creature was thought to live in evergreen forests, not necessarily that open grassland that we might think about when we're thinking about early hominid ancestors. This is one of the oldest bipedal fossils, and we know this by studying fossilized bones from 5 different individuals. That really gives us a better sense for what they did as a population. And here we have represented in this figure some leg bones from this specimen, some teeth, as well as neck bones. But we only have a few femurs and teeth. It's extremely rare to get a full fossilized individual recovered from a dig site. Instead, you're really just relying on fragments. And if you're lucky, they're attached to other bones, but most of the time they're disarticulated or separated out and scattered. But let's go back to why bipedalism is so important. Weight bearing on knees allows modern humans to be very effective bipeds. So in humans, when we walk, for example, the feet pass close to each other during walking. And that means that our center of gravity can move ahead in a straight line. All right, so here's what we mean in a human. We have the knee, and the pelvis is situated directly above that knee. And so you'll notice that if we take a look at the architecture in the chimpanzee and the Australopithecus, we don't really have that straight line, especially within the Australopithecus. So what that means, if we didn't have the center of gravity, as represented with this direct line between the knee and the pelvis, in order to move forward, we would have to swing back and forth with each stride in a wide arc in order to accommodate that architecture. That would be extremely clumsy and inefficient, and of course waste a whole lot of energy. So that's why the evolution of weight bearing on the knees in bipeds allows us to be so successful. Let's focus in on this key fossil that is affectionately called Lucy. She is a representative of the Australopithecus lineage, and she is considered one of the very first humans that we would consider humans. This dates about 4.4 million years ago. Again, not a modern human, but Lucy walked fully upright with human-like teeth and hands, and this comes from fossil evidence of hips and hands. We do have a full skull, and we know that the capacity of that skull was about 1/3 of the modern human size. This Australopithecus lineage lasted about 3 million years, so pretty successful if you were to ask me. And all of the fossils that we have of this lineage are from Eastern and Southern Africa. And here we have an image of Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. This particular fossil that's imaged here is 3.24 million years old. And here's a image at a dig site where we even have fossilized footprints, which is incredible to me. We do have at the McClung Museum at the University of Tennessee a full cast reconstructed Lucy. It's not the real bones, it is a cast, but it's still an incredible exhibit, and it's part of this whole human origins exhibit that they have. So as I said, Lucy here, Australopithecus afarensis, lasted several million years. Notice that Australopithecus afarensis is not the only representative hominin on this chart. We have several others, as we've talked about before. What's fascinating is that some of these specimens are considered by some scientists to be the same species. So again, talking about splitting versus lumping in taxonomy, the Homo ergaster, Homo habilis, and Homo rudolfensis are considered by some to be a single species of Homo habilis, which in that case would mean that it spans this entire breadth of time here. And then up here, these three are sometimes classified by a single species of Homo sapiens, with us, modern humans, being a subspecies of Homo sapiens. So by some scientists, Homo sapiens includes Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens. But pick your poison. Here are some direct comparisons between the different hominin groups and their height, physique, brain size, skull form, jaws and teeth, distribution, and known date. I'm not expecting you to memorize all of this, but it is fascinating to do direct comparisons. Let's talk now about Homo habilis. Here we have some reconstructions of what Homo habilis would have looked like when it was on Earth. We have fossils from Homo habilis dating from 2.5 to 1.6 million years ago. We do have fossil evidence that they walked upright for about 2 million years, and they even fashioned simple stone tools. Now, getting to the ecological point of this, they did coexist with smaller brained hominins for nearly 1 million years. And that smaller brained hominin was Australopithecus. And what's fascinating is that Australopithecus afarensis was a dead end, meaning that there were no new lineages that were directly coming from Australopithecus. Instead, Australopithecus was probably outcompeted by Homo habilis, and Homo habilis led to Homo erectus, which led to Homo sapiens. Okay, so in some way, we can attribute our success to the success of Homo habilis in its environment. And Homo habilis had this notable loss of hair within their lineage. So next to Homo ergaster, they displayed even less sexual dimorphism and more pair bonding. They had a larger brain. They also had slender legs, which allowed more distance walking. They had short, straight fingers, which was really good for crafting tools, not so good for climbing trees anymore, but this was their evolutionary trajectory that allowed them to really get into tool making. They had smaller teeth, and they had to prepare their food more. They had more advanced tools, and they conquered more habitats. And we have dates placed on Homo ergaster about 1.9 to 1.6 million years ago. Here's Homo erectus. Homo erectus was the first to migrate out of Africa into Asia and to Europe, which is an extremely pivotal keystone moment in the spread of the Homo lineage. We have two fossil representatives in really good shape from Homo erectus. We have the Java man and the Peking man. Those are both from the Homo erectus species. We think Homo erectus lived from 1.8 to about 300 million years ago. So pretty recent when we're talking about our hominin ancestry. The Homo erectus gave rise to larger populations. This allowed them to expand out and expand their geographic range. They were able to find more food sources and hunt farther away. They also employed fire and cooking when preparing their food. Next, we have Homo heidelbergensis. Homo heidelbergensis descended from Homo ergaster in Africa and then spread out. We had northern populations in Europe under Ice Age conditions. And these groups then became the Neanderthals about 400 to 40,000 years ago in Europe. The remaining population in Africa adapted to more drought-like conditions and then spread out to the rest of the world. And here we have a map here just tracing the migrations of different hominin lineages out of Africa. Talking about Homo neanderthalensis, of course, we know Homo neanderthalensis more colloquially as the caveman. We could see that they were probably shorter in stature, perhaps had a more pronounced brow, but by and large, we understand that this group lived about 400,000 to 28,000 years ago in Europe. They did have brains as large or larger than present day humans, but they did have different skull architecture, like a more pronounced brow, for example. We do have evidence that they buried their dead and undertook these different cultural practices in their family interactions. They made hunting tools from stone and wood. They were mainly carnivorous in their diet. And interestingly, they did interbreed with Homo sapiens. It is a misnomer that Neanderthals are brutish and coarse and violent. There's actually more and more studies showing that they were not more violent than the lineages that gave rise to modern day humans. It's just some of our innate prejudices, of course, as with any scientific enterprise, likes to infiltrate our interpretations of things. So again, please watch this YouTube video that discusses the course of events that probably took place when we met other humans. It wasn't all violent. And then finally, to Homo sapiens. Of course, the scientific name is Homo sapiens, and we live to be about 79 years old. We have a max speed of 28 miles per hour. Our males and our females tend to be about the same size on average. We have a large prefrontal cortex, and there are different hypotheses surrounding the emergence of modern day Homo sapiens. There's a multi-regional model, which puts forth that there was interbreeding among different Homo erectus groups, and there is a common origin for Homo sapiens on different continents. And then there's also the out of Africa hypothesis. We will get into these two in the coming slides. And so we should remember that it was only about 200,000 years ago that the oldest modern human hit the scene. So evolutionary speaking, we're pretty young. All right, so let's take a look at these different hypotheses about the emergence of modern day humans. First, we have the multi-regional hypothesis. The multi-regional hypothesis holds that human populations first arose around 2 million years ago, and the subsequent human evolution has been within a single continuous human species, which encompasses nearly all hominin ancestors, such as Homo erectus and Homo neanderthalensis, as well as modern humans. So these forms then evolved worldwide to the diverse populations that we see today, all the while being able to continuously interbreed with each other. So this hypothesis was first put forth in 1984, but it's actually been revised in 2003. And in the revised form, this hypothesis states that modern humans originated in Africa and today share a predominant recent African origin, but have also absorbed small geographically variable degrees of admixture from other regional hominin species. Okay, so that is the multi-regional hypothesis, single continuous line of humans that picked up different small geographic variables in their genes from different regions. Next, we have the out of Africa theory. This is also called the recent single origin hypothesis or the replacement hypothesis. This one is the dominant model of the geographic origin and early migration of anatomically modern humans. So this hypothesis proposes that we had multiple waves of migration events from a single origin of Homo sapiens in Africa. This is based upon mitochondrial DNA and populations of humans with similar sequences of DNA. We can group different sequences of mitochondrial DNA into smaller populations called haplogroups. And these smaller populations are denoted as L1, L2, L3, and so on and so forth. But we can trace back the lineage of the mitochondrial DNA to a single ancestor, which is a female, called mitochondrial Eve, about 150,000 years ago. Okay, and this is because mitochondrion can only be passed on from the mother. All right, so here we have a grandmother that contains in the chromosomes that she gives to her offspring both nuclear DNA and mitochondrial DNA. That mitochondrial DNA then can be passed on to her children, but it's only within the maternal lineage that that DNA from the mitochondrion can be passed down. So mitochondrial DNA is passed down from mother to child along the maternal line. And therefore, when we trace back our mitochondrial ancestor, we arrive at mitochondrial Eve, which is the ancestral mother of all people living today. So I grabbed this from the internet, and I think it's great, and it sums up the entire point here. All people are related to mitochondrial Eve, no matter perceived race. We can all trace our lineage back to one mitochondrial ancestor. And she lived in East Africa about 180 to 150,000 years ago. We can call these populations of mitochondrial sequences haplogroups, okay? And she belonged to a macro haplogroup that contains the now current Asians, Europeans, and Africans. They are all from this root haplogroup. And here we can talk about the vast migrations that Homo sapiens undertook on their way to really conquer all space in the world. So about 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged out of Africa, but by about 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had spread throughout the entirety of Eurasia, so Europe and Asia. They were competing among other hominin groups and eventually outcompeted them and displaced them, but not without taking some of their genetic components with them through instances of interbreeding. And we can understand what happened early in our ancestry by following molecular data as well as climate reconstructions. Hooray, we made it to the end of module 3. Just to put all of what we learned in this past module into the framework of the 5 big ideas in biology: structure and function, systems, transformation of energy and matter, information flow and storage, and finally evolution. Of course, there's a whole lot of intermixing here, but hopefully you're able to, on your own, sort of mind map where all of the stuff that we discussed, starting off with homeostasis and feedbacks, all the way through human origins, has to do with these 5 big ideas.